Okay, welcome to this week's Parsha, Parsha's Bamidbar. If you're listening online, please go to the website torahtoday.org and you'll have the source sheet which you can use to go through the Shiur together. It's hopefully a much more enjoyable experience. So let's take a look at the first source. The starting point is the beginning of the Parsha, Parsha's Bamidbar. Vayidaba Hashem el Moshe b'Midbar Sinai b'Oyel Moed be'echad l'chodesh Hashem b'shon Hashenis. The Seiso Meretz Mitzrayim, Su'u Esreish Kol Adas B'nei Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe to count Klal Yisrael, Kol Zocha L'Gulgul Yisam. Now, there's lots to say on this, but I came across something astonishing in a very mainstream sefer in Rabbi Franz, one of the world-renowned Marbitz Torah, one of the Rosh Yeshivas of Nei Yisrael in Baltimore, and in his sefer, The Power of Avot, he quotes something from the Ramah Pano. Now, the Ramah Pano is, when you come across his Torah, it's sometimes just breathtaking. Who was he? He lived in the late 1500s, early 1600s. He was a great Mekubal. He was a huge Talmid Chacham and Pesach, and he was a Talmid of Ramosha Cordovera, the Ramak. Interestingly, he was sort of rubbed shoulders with the greats of the times of the Mekubalim in Sfas. He actually was entrusted by Rabbi Yosef Cairo, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, and also one of the great personalities of that time, one of the giants of Jewish history, who of course authored the Shulchan Aruch, but he also wrote the Kesef Mishnah, Pirush on the Rambam. And Rabbi Yosef Cairo entrusted the Ramah Pano to print his Kesef Mishnah, and the Ramah Pano was only 26 years old. This is in 1574. So he was a young man, he was a great Onov and a man of great wealth, and he published lots of works. He died in 1620, and we have a lot of his writing. And like I say, sometimes you come across his Torah and it's just breathtaking. And the first idea relates to this opening pasuk of Su'u Esreish Kol Adas B'nei Yisrael, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu to count Klal Yisrael L'Gulgul Yisam. And says the Ramah Pano, his name is Menachem Azariah, the Ramah is Rabbi Menachem Azariah, and Pano is a town in Italy where they come from. He says that this relates to the very esoteric concept of Gilgul Neshamos, which means that a Neshama has a mission in this world, and many Neshamas don't manage to complete that mission. So they have to come back again to ensure HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives them the privilege of coming back again to sort of afford them the opportunity to complete their mission. And we'll see exactly what this means and how it relates, because, and again, I've seen it in this mainstream writing of Rabbi Franz, but I've explored the sources and we'll go through it together, but it's really quite breathtaking. So take a look at the second box. This is the Pninei Haramah Mepano, and he says over there in page 126 the following. Shaya Moshe Tzoyfe B'Ruach HaKodesh. Moshe Rabbeinu was able to see with his Ruach HaKodesh, Minyan HaTipin Sheberosh Kol Echad. That's what it means, Su'es Rosh. I.e., Kama Toldos Yamid. That each person he was able to count, not just those who were there at the time, but those who would come from them, the future generations, the progeny of those who were there in his generation. He was able to see beyond the here and now. That's what it means, moreover, not only that, he was able to see how many times each of their neshamas would have to come back again in the form of a gilgul. In English it's called transmigration of souls. How many times they'd have to come back to this world. That's the hidden secret in the word legulgul oisam. Shuloshin gilgul. Legulgul oisam alludes to this idea of gilgul neshamis, that Moshe Rabbeinu counted not only those who were there and all future generations, but also how many times each neshama is going to have to come back to this world. Legulgul oisam. And that's included in the well-known idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu he showed him each generation and its leaders and its the people who would be sustain Klal Yisrael financially, that Moshe Rabbeinu was privy to all of this information, all of this future information. Now, why do I mention this and what's the idea? The idea is that the concept of Gilgul Neshamas although it's of course a very esoteric one, it's Kabbalistic, and I'm not at all versed in any of these things, only Asik b'nistarim. I'm just sharing you with what I've seen here in the writings here. But it does help us to understand sometimes, with care, difficulties in life. Sometimes a person seems to have a lot of challenges. And if a person realizes there is a concept of Gilgul, we don't know when it applies, and we can't point to any specific situation and say that person is a Gilgul. We don't know that. But the concept helps us understand difficulties in life, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu affords each neshama the opportunity to enjoy the most immense pleasure possible in Olam Haba, to bask in the proximity of the Shekhinah, allowing a neshama to complete his mission. So and therefore, as HaKadosh Baruch Hu is a meitiv, he wants the best for every neshama. He wants each neshama to enjoy for eternity that immense pleasure of being in Olam Haba, of having that closeness with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and basking in the glow of the Shekhinah. But the only way the neshama is going to do that is if it completes its mission. And therefore, it's a chesed of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to give each neshama the opportunity to come back again and complete its mission. And indeed, the Mekubalim say that nowadays many people in the world today have been here before, and most neshamas are not new neshamas, and we're here just to fix up missions which were not completed on previous occasions. Now, there is another famous Ramah Pano where he gives an illustration of this, and this is an astonishing example. It's a famous Gemara in Gittin. This is the Gemara often learnt on Tisha B'Av. There are a few daf there. The Kamtza Bar Kamtza Gemara begins with that's the Gemara you can learn on Tisha B'Av, and then for the next 3 or 4 blat, that's the Gemara, a very sad Gemara describing the stories of the Churban and other times. And there is one very poignant story over there where the Ramah Panos will see makes a comment on it. So take a look at the next box. This is a Gemara in Gittin Daf Nun Ches Omid Aleph. Omer Rav Yehuda Omer Rav. Tragic story. Ma'aseh b'bnei Bitei shel Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. There was a story with the son and the daughter of Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha. Shenishpu l'shnei adoinim. They were captured to 2 masters. Liyomim, one day, nizdavku shneim b'mokem echad. These 2 adoinim who had now one bought the son of Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, and one bought the daughter. Ze'omi yeshli eved she'en kiyofia b'chol olam. I've bought an eved who is the most handsome man. There's nothing paralleling his beauty in the whole world. And the other one said, well, that's funny because I've bought a maidservant who is also, her beauty is nothing, there's nothing paralleling it in the whole world. Interestingly, the Midrashim say that Bishmal ben Elisha was one of the most handsome men that ever walked this planet. It goes back to Adam Rishon, Yaakov Avinu, and others. I think it's Yaakov Avinu, that their beauty was so astonishing, and he was the 7th one on that chain. Omru. So the 2 of them said, we've got a plan. Let's marry them off together. And the children will inherit that physical beauty, and then we'll share the progeny. They put them into a room. And in the hope that they would live together and produce children. Yoshev b'keren zovis zeh, v'zeh Yoshva b'keren zovis zeh. So the son sat in one corner, the other, and the girl sat in the other corner. Zeh omer. This one said, "Ani kohen ben kohanim gedolim." I'm a kohen. I'm come from wonderful stock, the son of kohanim gedolim. Esa shifra. Am I going to marry and live with this shifra? V'zois, and then on the other side of the room, this shifra, not knowing that on the other side of the room it's her brother, she says, "Ani kohenes bas kohanim gedolim." I'm the kohenes, the daughter of kohanim gedolim, and also le'eved. I'm going to marry an eved. U'bachul kol halayla, and they cried the whole night and they didn't go near each other. Kivin she'ola omet hashachar kiru zeh zeh. Then when dawn broke and it became light, they recognized each other. V'noflu zeh al zeh v'ga'u b'bechia. They recognized each other and they cried. They fell in each other's arms and they embraced and they cried with heart-rending sobs, until they both passed away. And on them, Yirmiyah makes one of the kinnas and says, Al eile ani bechia, eini yerda moyim. The very poignant story is recorded there in the Gemara in Gittin. Okay, so this is what we learn on Tisha B'Av, the saddest day of the year. And of course, that's an appropriate theme of the day, as it were. Comes along the Rabbi Pano, and he says something astonishing. Look at the next box. This is from his Sefer Gilgulei Neshamas, the Rabbi Pano. This story, the Gemara which I just read. You know who these two children were? They were the Gilgulim of Amnon and Tamar, the children of David HaMelech. Ach va'achos, k'fi yefas toya hoisa, v'gam kein, Amnon toivei roya v'yofa. What's the story of Amnon and Tamar? That they were the children of David HaMelech, and Amnon assaulted his own sister. And they were both very beautiful. She was the daughter, she was Yefas Toya, of beautiful appearance, and Amnon as well was Tov Rei V'Yofa. And therefore, he assaulted her, and they were given a chance, then the Shamas were given a chance to come back to this world, to be in a room together, and to refrain from touching each other, and from being together, and that was the opportunity to complete their mission in this world. So it changes everything. We learn this Gemara in Gittin, and of course it's a heartbreaking story, but ultimately it was a chesed from HaKadosh Baruch Hu that they were able to come back to this world and complete the mission that was not completed previously. Now, my friend quotes an idea of the Chavetz Chaim, but I want to do the Chavetz Chaim inside. Chavetz Chaim is written, there are many Sfarim of the Chavetz Chaim, and records of his Torah. And this is from the Chavetz Chaim on the Nevi'im Ksuvim, page 60. The Pasuk says in Tehillim, in Kapitel Yutes, Mishpatei Hashem Emes, the laws of Hashem are true, Tzodku Yachtov, together they are just. What does that mean, Tzodku Yachtov, together they are tzedek, they are just? Take a look at the Chavetz Chaim. Now this needs careful handling, how to say it, but I think there's something which is very comforting about it. Mashma. Dafka biyosem yachat tzodkim. The implication is dafka when they're together, they're tzedek. Avlo biyosem ba'ofen echad, not when you only see one perspective. Omnom. Yodua. Ki aveira, says the Chavetz Chaim. Aveira shebein odom lechaveiroi. Sins which are between man and man. Ein yom kippur mechapat shiratzes chaveira. That's the famous Gemara in Yuma. You cannot atone for bein odom lechaveiro crimes unless you ask forgiveness from the person you've offended. V'im echad chora forgiveness chaveiro. If one person cursed his friend, or he hit him, b'yodoi v'lo bikesh shlichoso, and didn't ask mechila, ein lo takon ad sheyeh muchruch lovei shuv lo'olam hazeh b'gilgul. If he didn't get mechila, then he will need to come back to this world in a gilgul. Ulafayes es chaveiro shechotza kenegdoi, and to ask mechila for the person who he offended, who he sinned against. U'mekiven she'odom shomeh ba'olam ha'elyon. And when this person, when they hear about this in the upper worlds, shenigzol of loredes la'olam hato ha'oid hapam, when they hear in the upper world that this person who committed a crime by embarrassing, humiliating, hitting this other person, that he's going to be afforded the chance to come back here, who b'kol mar, he will cry with a bitter voice, why did I do that? Why did I embarrass this person? He will claim, why didn't the first time you created me so big and strong, or you created me to be you're very wealthy? And sometimes, as the Chavetz Chaim says, there's Oshi v'avelei v'Oshi yan azus, and sometimes that follows that I'm a bit brazen and overconfident, and therefore I was arrogant and I hit this person or I embarrassed him. And that's why I was chutzpahdik until I hit this other guy. So he sort of has a complaint against HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why did you make me that so wealthy or so strong that I committed this crime? If I would have been created poor, I wouldn't have the audacity to hit somebody else. And he begs HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please let me come back down to this world, that I will have a chance to rectify my mistake. Turning over the page, and when the neshama sees that the only eight is to come down, so at least if you're coming, letting me come back as a gilgul, Create me, Hashem, as a poor person or someone with lowly spirits. Or balmum below yad, or create me even as a balmum without a hand. That I won't be able to hit another person. But the Beis Din Shel Ma'ala are saying, no, we don't want you to go down. Why should you get another chance? You blew it first time round. Because there won't be Tshuvas HaMishkal, which means it won't be absolutely fair. It won't be, in other words, you won't have the exact opportunity, and it won't be exact tshuva to be put in the situation that you were previously in. And on the contrary, create him again, wealthy, with strong and with two arms, that he's put in the same situation, and that will be proper tshuva. But only after much begging and tefillas, that actually his wish is granted, and he comes down to this world impoverished or with some physical deficiency. Last paragraph. Now he comes down to this world, and this person is now reborn. This is his second appearance, maybe more, and he comes down to this world, and he's complaining about his muzzle, his lot. He's complaining about being poor, or some sort of lack of health, or some physical impediment. And he's totally forgotten that he begged for this. He begged to be born poor or physically impeded in some way, so that he shouldn't hit his friend or curse him. That's pshat in the Pasuk in Tehillim, that the mishpatim of Hashem are just dafka yachtov, when they're together, i.e., when you know the full picture, you know not just what is here and now in front of your eyes, but you know what was previously happened in a previous Gilgul. How he desperately wanted to be born in this fashion. So it's an astonishing idea, what seems to be, a simple pasuk. Just count the Jewish people. Says the Ramah Mepano, this is referring to something way bigger. It refers to the esoteric concept of Gilgul Neshamas, of transmigration of souls, and says the Ramah Mepano, the Moshe Rabbeinu Baruch HaKodesh could see, not only count the people in front of him, but also all the progeny of these people, and also all the times that the Neshamas would have to come back, repeatedly sometimes, to complete their mission, which is a chesed from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even though it's difficult for the neshama, but ultimately it allows the neshama to complete its mission, and therefore be afforded the opportunity to enjoy the ultimate experience, the ultimate pleasure of basking in the Shechina and enjoying the most pleasurable experience in the Olam Haba. And that you see this in lots of situations. The Gemara in Gittin with the son and the daughter Rishma ben Elisha, they're crying. We read this Gemara in Gittin on Tisha B'Av, and it's of course a heartbreaking Gemara. But when you suddenly see that twist of the Rameh Pana that we're talking about, the Gilgul Neshamas of Amnon and Tamar, and it's a chesed that they're given the opportunity to, fix up what was they've previously the previous shortfall of Amnon. That now we understand. Perhaps there's a bigger picture, and that's really what the Chavetz Chaim is saying. That Mishpatei Hashem Sodku Yachtov, Mishpatei Hashem Emes, that the judgments, the laws of HaKadosh Baruch Hu are true, Sodku Yachtov, when they're together. What's together? They're just when you see the full picture, not just what's the situation in this world. You look at this world and you see a person who's desperately poor or who's suffering from physical ailments. But perhaps, there's a backstory. The backstory could be something that happened in a previous life. And we've got to be careful. We can't point our finger and say, yes, that this is the story, and you shouldn't comfort a person, in this way. That's not everyone is able to hear this. And we don't know with any accuracy. Maybe he's a pristine first neshama. Maybe this is his nisoyan. We don't know. We can't play God. But the concept of it, I think, is a very important one. As Rabbi Frand puts it, it's understanding the inexplicable. It gives us some understanding that there's a much bigger picture going on, and that itself is a comforting idea. Okay, let's press on. The pasuk says in Perek Gimel, the first pasuk, "Ve'ela told us Aaron and Moshe b'yom diba Hashem es Moshe b'Har Sinai." Interestingly, says Rashi, when it says Eila told us Aaron and Moshe, Eina mazke ele b'nei Aaron. It only goes on to list the children of Aaron, not the children of Moshe Rabbeinu, and yet v'nikru told us Moshe, and yet the children of Aaron are called the generations of Moshe. Why? Says Rashi, famously quoting a Gemara in Sanhedrin Yutes, Lefisha limdon Torah, because he taught them Torah. Melamed shekol melamed is ben chaver Torah. That teaches us that anyone who teaches his son's friend, his friend's son Torah, Ma'ale lo v'akosov ki'ilu yoldo. It's as if you've actually given birth to them. Okay, a very well-known Rashi, a very well-known Gemara. Therefore, when it says Eila told us Aaron and Moshe, it's actually just lists the children of Aaron HaKohen, but it's calls them told us of Moshe because he taught them, and therefore it's as if he's given birth to them. I came across a fascinating anecdote regarding Rav Simcha Wasserman. Rav Simcha Wasserman, the son of Rabbi Chanan, one of the great Rosh Yeshivas of the previous generation, he spent many years in Los Angeles. And one time, a respected academic wanted to say Kaddish, and he would come to the yeshiva of Simcha Wasserman. And one time, this academic went over to the Rosh Yeshiva of Simcha Wasserman and said, Rabbi Simcha, you teach and I teach. You teach Torah and I teach advanced mathematics. Is there any difference between us? So Rabbi Simcha said the following. He said, tell me, how many students have you taught over the years? And the academic said, hundreds, possibly thousands. Tell me, says Rabbi Simcha, how many of their weddings have you been invited to? Why would they invite me to their wedding? I teach them mathematics. Says Rabbi Simcha, that's exactly the point. I am invited to numerous weddings of my students, of my Talmidim, because of this Rashi, that's called Hamelamed ben Chaver Torah Ma'ale lo v'akosov ki'ilu yoldo. The relationship with the Rebbe and a Talmud is totally different to that of an academic professor and his students. It's a family relationship. You feel totally connected, hopefully, to that Rebbe. That's what it's all about. It's all about the amitus of the relationship, the genuineness of the relationship between the Talmud and the Rebbe. That's really the success of any Talmud, of any Rebbe. That's from Shlomo Freifeld. That's his statement, which I've got it plastered up in my office in school. A few weeks ago, I had the privilege of going to the chasna of my dear colleague and friend, Rabbi Yoni Rosenfeld. And he's a wonderful person and a phenomenal Rebbe, a phenomenal Talmid Chacham Rebbe, and invests enormously in his Talmidim, and it's reciprocated because they love him back hugely. So this chasna was in Antwerp. So my wife and I went with many others, and we enjoyed the chasna in Antwerp a couple of weeks ago. What was amazing is that we organized a coach to take dozens and dozens of boys from school to participate in the wedding. And it was a sight to behold, because they left school at lunchtime. It took many hours to get there, 8 or 9 hours to get there. They arrived at the chasna at 9 o'clock at night, full of enthusiasm, excitement to dance with their beloved Rebbe. And they did that for a few hours, and then at midnight they went straight back on the coach to be back in school the next day, to 8 o'clock or whatever it was the next day. So they spent 16, 17 hours on a coach to be at the chasna for a couple of hours. But I'll tell you what's something interesting. They were so excited, and perhaps the etiquette at the chasna was a bit lacking. But when the first dance, when the chasna came in, it was the first dance. Of course, normally the immediate family comes to the first dance. But they felt like they were immediate family. They felt, Ma'ale lo v'akosov ki'ilu yoldo. And to the point that the singer had to say that only immediate family at the first dance. Because, Baruch Hashem, dozens and dozens of Talmidim were wanting to dance with their Rebbe. So that is an application of this. Eila told us Aaron and Moshe. Let me finish with one final idea, which is also a phenomenal idea. The Pasuk says in Perek Dalet, Pasuk Yudches, Al tachrisu es shevet mishpachas hakahosi metoich halviyim. Again, seemingly a straightforward Pasuk. The Pasuk says that we shouldn't cut off shevet, the mishpachas kahosi, from the Leviyim. What does that mean? So, the Medrash on this Pasuk says the following. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman Omar, Chas v'shalom lo hoi b'nei kahos manichin es ha'aron, v'rotzin l'shulchan ha'menorah. Don't say, the previous opinion said that the Bnei Kahos who were charged with carrying the Aron, transporting it from place to place, don't say they abandoned that and they went to the Shulchan the Menorah. No. El afal pishanim smartin, even though taking the Aron is high stake, because it's radioactive, it's the most Kodesh part of the whole Mishkan, they nevertheless they very much wanted to carry the Aron, and they gave their souls for it. Why therefore does the Torah tell us, Al tachrisu, be very careful, because you're going to, you're playing with fire? And because they knew, whoever would carry the Aron, schare meruba, the schar for carrying the Aron, the most important part of the whole Mishkan, was the schar is immense. And they would leave all the other important kelim, and everyone would run to the Aron, little schar, to get the reward. And it sort of broke out into arguments, because everyone said, no, I want to carry the Aron. And this one said, and that led to inappropriate behavior for his because no one else wanted to carry the other items. Everyone was running towards the Aron. Amar Hashem to Moshe, no. Make sure that you do a takana, that they shouldn't be cut off from this world. Al tachrisu al yisadru yisam al avidosum al masom shel zeh. And therefore organize with detail who would carry what, where, and when. In other words, the Medrash is saying that the Bnei Kahos wanted desperately to carry the Aron, but it came with a downside. The downside was that they ran to the Aron and they abandoned the other kelim in the Mishkan. The Mesilas Yesharim, in the 20th chapter, introduces a concept called Mishkal HaChasidus. Mishkal HaChasidus essentially is where, let's take a look, we'll see it from in his words. Vehu inyan ikari ma'od ma'od. This is the Mesilas Yesharim in Perek Chof. It's an essential idea, this Mishkal HaChasidus. Sometimes you shouldn't make the mistake by looking at the action alone. You've got to look at all the sort of the around and the arounds. You've got to see all aspects of your decision. Is it appropriate that I engage in this activity, or maybe I should hold back? Because on the outside it looks like a good idea, but perhaps I'm missing something. Mishkal HaChasidus means I've got to weigh it up. I'll give you examples in a second. Re'ei, Parsha tu sheroi l'chol odom liyos makdim v'rotz l'dvar mitzvah. It's Parsha that a person should run and be early for a dvar mitzvah, l'shtadel liyos mino iskim bo, to be someone engaged in it. But sometimes more terrible things will come along on the back of this mitzvah. And there'll be a greater chilul Hashem than kiddush Hashem. Better sometimes that the chosid, the pious person, of course not referring to chasidim, it's referring to just piety generally, that should leave the mitzvah and not pursue it. Better to leave it. And he brings a source from our pasuk. Quoting the Medrash Rabbi, which I just quoted, because they knew that whoever would carry the Aron, the reward is great. Therefore, so everyone was running to the Aron, they're thinking it's a great mitzvah, but it comes at a cost, because they're abandoning the other items in the Mishkan, the Shulchan, the Menorah, etc. And there would be arguments, etc., etc. In other words, the Mesilas Yesharim is introducing this concept of Mishkal HaChasidus, that sometimes what appears as a mitzvah, if you focus on that and you run towards it, you've got to look at the fallout. And sometimes there is a fallout. So I'll give you a couple of examples. This I saw in the writings of Rav Palm. Rav Palm mentions this medrash, and he quotes the Mesilas Yesharim, and he's talking about a yahrzeit. So sometimes on a yahrzeit, we do, people, sadly, they've got to say Kaddish, and they're going to noig the Avelis on the day of the yahrzeit, but sometimes you've got to look at the bigger picture. So he quotes a few examples. One example is the daughter of Rabbi Akiva Eiger. The daughter of Rabbi Akiva Eiger was the second wife of the Chasam Sofer. The Chasam Sofer married a second time when his wife passed away, and he married the daughter of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, and in fact she was the mother of most of his children. Now in Chut HaMashulish, which tells the biography of the Chasam Sofer and that dynasty, it says there that she wrote in her will, i.e. the Chasam Sofer's wife, the daughter of Rabbi Akiva Eiger, that although there is a mitzvah brought in Shulchan Aruch that one should try and fast on the yahrzeit of a parent, she specifically requested that the children don't fast. Why? Because she knew that when one fasts, a person's ability to learn Torah is significantly diminished, and she felt that it would be a greater merit for her neshama if her children would learn, would devote the day to intense Torah study, and therefore if they were fasting they wouldn't be able to do that. And the Chasam Sofer ruled that her request be honoured. And in fact, the son, the Ksav Sofer, would make a siyum on her yahrzeit and would eat a milchik suda in honour of the occasion. Now, Rabbi Palm adds on the following: many people have yahrzeit and their parents are buried in Eretz Yisrael, but they could live in Chutz La'aretz, and therefore they make an annual yahrzeit trip. And this could involve, great tircha, expense, often a week or two disruption of their daily schedules. And sometimes the person may think it's a fulfillment of kibbud av v'eim, but sometimes, says Rav Palm, it would be better if they would actually stay at home, give the money that would have been set aside for that trip to tzedakah, and learn more at home, and keep to your schedule where you'd actually get more learning done and more chesed than actually making the trip. Sometimes that's mishkala chasidus. We've got to weigh it up. Another example he gives is Rabbi Yisrael Salanta. That of course, if you can on the yahrzeit, you get to the Omid and you say Kaddish. And Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, he tells the story. He was once in a certain shul. He had yahrzeit, and the Gabba gave Rabbi Yisrael the honor of serving of the shliach tzibur. However, there was another person in the shul who also had yahrzeit. So Rabbi Yisrael Salanta declined, and saying that the Gabba should ask the other man, a simple Jew, instead. And the Gabba was puzzled, and he said, why give up the opportunity to daven for the Amud on your father's yahrzeit? And Yisrael explained, I know that other person would have chalisha sadas, he would have a heartache if he would not be able to daven for the Amud. And I think that allowing him to daven and sparing him that emotional pain will bring greater merit to my father's soul than for me davening for the Amud. That's Mishkal HaChasidus. Let me share, when finished with this, one final example of Mishkal HaChasidus. I'm reading a book at the moment, Rav Matisyahu, the great Mashgiach, formerly of Gateshead and then later of Lakewood, and he mentions this exact point. It so happens that's where I was up to, an amazing point. It was the first night of Slichus in Lakewood. Rav Matisyahu, for those who were in Gateshead and knew Rav Matisyahu, he understood Emas Hadin and Elul perhaps more than others. And the atmosphere in Lakewood was heavy. It was the first night of Slichas. Everyone was preparing for the Yom Hadin. And a difficult case of Shalom Bayis came to the Mashgiach, came to Rav Matisyahu. And he'd been working very hard to try and resolve it. And at some point on that Motzei Shabbos, the Mashgiach thought to himself that he, together with a prominent therapist, he makes up a name, Reb Reuven, I don't know who the therapist was, and he calls him up and says, I want to discuss a particular, a marriage with you, and with his experience, they would have the right insight, and and the Mashgiach had no problem with that. He had no airs and graces, and he had no problem consulting with others. On the contrary, he would recommend it. Anyway, so this therapist said, okay, I'll come to the Mashgiach tomorrow. He says, tomorrow? Why not today? So let me read you what he says. Soon Slichas will be starting, this therapist said, and I'm going to Slichas. You're what? Said the Mashgiach. I'm going to Slichas. With a stern expression on his face, Rav Matisyahu countered, Reb Reuven, this fictitious name, I would have expected you to have a better understanding. We are talking about saving an entire family from catastrophe, and you are talking about going to Slichas? That was the Mashgiach, yes. He was the biggest proponent of Musa and Emas Hadin. He understood more than anybody else how preparing for Slichas and Yom Nerom was critically important for one's spiritual welfare. At the same time, the Mashgiach acted in accordance with the concept of what the Mesilas Yesharim calls Mishkal HaChasidus. Our point. This implies weighing the different areas of Avodas Hashem and determining which is weightier. In this case, the Mashgiach understood that if need be, Hashem required him to even miss the first hallowed night of Slichas to save this home from destruction. It's about balance. The Mashgiach embodied a balanced Musa personality and thus knew and taught which midas to use, when and how to use them. But that's the idea. So let's just quickly summarize what we said. 3 ideas: understanding the inexplicable, that fascinating Ramah Mipano, alluding to the esoteric concept of Gilgal Neshamas in the first posuk of the Sedra, and the Gemara in Gittin with the son and the daughter of Rishma ben Elisha, and then the Moshel of the Chovetz Chaim as described. Then the idea of Talmidim are children. Ve'ele told us Aaron and Moshe, and even though it doesn't list the children of Moshe, but the children of Aaron are attributed as told us of Moshe because he taught them Torah, and Kol HaMelamed ben Chaver Torah Ma'alel of HaKosov Ki'ilu Yilodei, and the anecdotes of Simcha Wasserman and the professor in Los Angeles, and my dear friend Rabbi Rosenfeld's Chasna. And then lastly, this idea of Mishkal HaChasidus, this week's Parsha, Al Tachrisu, is brought by the Medrash as an example of Mishkal HaChasidus, that they were focused on this particular mitzvah, but there was a fallout. And therefore, says the Mesilas Yesharim, you have to weigh up every mitzvah to check there is no fallout, and to look around in the big picture as described by Rav Palm regarding Yartzites and Rav Matis Yo Solomon. Thank you.